So picture this, right? You are walking into just a totally normal office kitchen. It is right around 9 a.m. You are, just trying to grab your morning tea or whatever. And there's this little communal honesty box sitting on the counter.
Yeah, just a standard little box where you're supposed to drop some change for the milk you use. Super mundane. It's something you wouldn't give a second thought to.
Exactly. But in this specific kitchen, there is a strange social experiment secretly going on. The researchers, they changed just one tiny little detail in the room. Right above that honesty box, they pin up a small photograph.
Right, and for 1 week, it is just a nice, pleasant picture of flowers.
Yeah, flowers. But then, the next week, they swap it out for an image of human eyes. And I mean, not just any eyes, but eyes that are staring directly at you.
Which is so creepy. But the brilliance of the setup is that there's absolutely no explicit communication. I mean, no announcements, no emails from HR, nothing.
No new instructions taped to the fridge at all.
Right. It is purely a silent environmental manipulation. The only variable changing is literally just that picture on the wall.
And the results of this are just shocking. During the weeks with the eyes, the office staff donated almost 3 times more money to the box than they did during the flower weeks. 3 times.
Yeah, and the crazy part is when the researchers asked the staff about it later, nobody even realized anything in the environment had changed. They were entirely oblivious.
Which is honestly deeply unsettling when you really think about it. I mean, we all like to believe our moral choices are conscious, right? Deliberate.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But what this shows is that our system 1, the brain's automatic unconscious network, is quietly governing our moral behavior based on a cheap poster.
Yeah. While our system 2, which is the conscious, rational brain that we firmly believe is running the show, just remains completely oblivious to being manipulated.
It really makes you question your own sense of agency.
It totally does. Welcome to Deep Cuts and Deep Thinking. Today we are doing a deep dive into Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and we're getting into the hidden gears of the mind.
Yeah, it's a fascinating book, and to really understand why those eyes had such a huge invisible effect, we kind of have to look at the brain's architecture. Specifically, we need to talk about the amygdala.
Right, which is basically the brain's threat center, isn't it? The part that deals with fear.
Exactly. It's our primary alarm system. Neuroscientists have found that the amygdala is, it's fundamentally designed to prioritize bad news. Processes potential threats incredibly fast, entirely bypassing our conscious awareness. I mean, think about our evolutionary history, right? If an ancestor saw the widened, fearful white sclera of another human's eyes, it meant a predator was probably nearby.
Right, so that rapid processing literally kept us alive.
Yes. So even in the current era where we are just getting milk in an office kitchen and not, running from a tiger, that ancient machinery is still running the show.
Wow, so the eyes on the wall trigger this unconscious feeling of being watched, which signals a potential social consequence, and it alters our behavior before we even pour our coffee.
That is the core premise of Daniel Kahneman's book, really. Our minds operate on these 2 entirely different systems. System 1 is fast, it's intuitive, immediate, it operates automatically with little or no effort.
And no sense of voluntary control, right? Like instantly reading the emotion on a woman's face.
Exactly, or reflexively dropping a coin in a box when eyes are watching. And then there's System 2, which is the slow one. The deliberate thinker.
The one that steps in to do complex math or figure out how to parallel park in a tight space.
Right. It requires your focused, conscious attention. It is associated with the subjective experience of choice and concentration.
Okay, but I have to push back a little here because this paints a pretty bleak picture of our own free will, It sounds like we are completely at the mercy of this unconscious autopilot. Is it fair to say System 1 is like the bass line in a song? Just invisibly dictating the groove and making you tap your foot, while System 2 thinks it's the lead guitar making all the conscious choices?
Oh, that is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. System 2 absolutely believes it is the lead guitar.
Right, it thinks it's doing a solo.
Yeah, it firmly believes it is making the rational choices guiding your day. But Daniel Kahneman's book provides incredible evidence of just how vulnerable System 2 really is to that baseline.
Okay, I love a good mind trick. How do we prove that?
Well, we can look at some simple visual illusions, like the famous Miller-Lire illusion.
Oh, is that the one with the arrows?
Yeah, imagine 2 horizontal lines on a page. One has arrows on the ends pointing outward, like the tail of a dart. The other has arrows pointing inward.
Right, and when you look at them, your System 1 immediately tells you the line with the inward pointing arrows is longer. It just looks way longer.
It is an automatic, undeniable visual conclusion. But the trick, as you probably know, is that if you measure them, they are identical.
Exactly the same length.
Yes, and here is where the cognitive conflict happens, which is crucial. Even if you take a ruler, measure both lines yourself, and your System 2 rationally understands as a mathematical fact that they are identical.
Your System 1 still stubbornly sees them as different lengths.
Exactly. You literally cannot force your brain to see them as equal. System 2 has learned the truth, but System 1 is still loudly generating the illusion.
Because System 1 is just constantly trying to make sense of 3D geometry in a 2D space. Daniel Kahneman's book has another great example with perspective.
The train tracks, right.
Yeah. It's a drawing of 2 men standing on train tracks that recede into the distance. And because of the converging lines, the man drawn on the right, who is placed further up the tracks, he looks absolutely massive compared to the guy on the left.
It is a phenomenal example of how System 1 applies real-world rules to flat images. If an object takes up the same space on your retina but is further away, it must be huge.
Right, the automatic brain just does that math instantly. But if you measure them, they are the exact same size.
It is so frustrating because you know for a fact they are the same size, but System 2 is powerless to stop the illusion.
Okay, so visual illusions are one thing, but there's a cognitive conflict task in the book that I think goes way beyond just shapes.
That really highlights how hard System 2 has to work to override System 1. So imagine reading down a column of words. First, you just have to call out whether the word is printed in lowercase or uppercase.
Which is super easy.
Very easy. But then the task changes. Now you have to say out loud whether the word is physically placed to the left or the right of the center of the page.
Right.
But here's the catch. The word itself might literally read left bed, but it is printed on the right side of the page.
Oh man, that sounds awful. Because your automatic reading response is violently clashing with a conscious task. Your brain is screaming left because you can't help but read it.
Exactly. It proves that System 1 is always running in the background. You cannot just decide to turn off your ability to read English.
Yeah, you can't unread a word.
No. So System 2 has to burn a tremendous amount of energy to actively suppress that reading response just to say where the word is located.
Wow. Okay, so if the baseline is always playing, and we just established it can be tricked by basic visual illusions and spatial conflicts, how on earth does System 1 decide what is true in our daily lives?
That brings us to a really powerful mechanism outlined in the book, the model of cognitive ease.
Cognitive ease, okay.
Yeah. When your brain is processing information, it operates on a spectrum. On one end, cognitive strain. On the other end, cognitive ease. When processing feels smooth, you are in a state of ease.
So what actually triggers that state? How does our brain know it is like at ease?
Several pathways. Repeated experiences cause ease. If a claim is in a clear, high-contrast display, that visual clarity causes ease.
Really? Just being easy to read?
Yes. Or if you have been primed with a related idea, or honestly, if you are simply in a really good mood, your brain enters this relaxed state, and when you're there, things automatically feel familiar, effortless, good, and most dangerously, they feel true.
Wait. So if a politician or a marketer just prints a claim in a really clear, bold font and happens to catch you on the 22nd of the month when you're in a great mood, your brain is fundamentally wired to register that claim as truth.
That is exactly what the research suggests. System 1 uses cognitive ease as a shortcut for truth. It doesn't want to spend the energy for System 2 to verify facts.
That is slightly terrifying.
It is. Furthermore, System 1 abhors ambiguity. It desperately wants a clean, coherent story of the world, and it will just jump to comfortable conclusions to give you that story.
Oh, like the visual example in the book with the letters and numbers?
Yes, the ABC one.
Right, so you see a box with the letters ABC, and next to it a box with the numbers 12, 13, 14. But the middle character in both sequences is physically identical. It's this weird shape that looks like a B with a gap, or a 1 and a 3 pushed together.
Yet your System 1 never registers that ambiguity. When you scan the letters, context tells you it is a B. When you scan the numbers, context says it is a 13.
And System 1 completely buries the ambiguity, keeping it a total secret from System 2.
Exactly. It does the same thing with language, like the sentence, Anne approached the bank.
Oh yeah, unless you are consciously thinking about rivers or fishing, your brain automatically assumes bank means a financial institution.
Right. You don't pause to weigh the definitions. Your brain just confidently picks the most statistically likely one based on context.
Which is remarkably efficient, I guess.
It is, but it has severe limits. System 1 is astonishingly good at instant holistic impressions, like glancing at varying lines and instantly knowing the average length, or looking at 2 block towers and knowing they're equally tall.
But I'm guessing it fails completely at precise math, right?
Completely. If I ask you if the blocks in those towers equal the scattered blocks on the floor, System 1 goes blank. It cannot calculate total amounts. Summation forces System 2 to wake up and take over.
Okay, so jumping to conclusions about block towers is one thing. But this tendency has to affect our real-world decisions, right? Regarding risk and money and pain.
This is where we get into Daniel Kahneman's Nobel Prize-winning work, Prospect Theory and Loss Aversion. Classical economics assumed humans were rational actors making calculated decisions to maximize absolute wealth.
Right, the whole homo economicus idea.
Exactly, but the author suggests that is fundamentally false. People evaluate their well-being based on gains and losses relative to their current baseline, not absolute wealth.
And the mathematical response to those gains and losses is not symmetrical, is it?
Not even close. According to the psychological value curve in Daniel Kahneman's book, the emotional response to a loss is mathematically much stronger than the response to a corresponding gain.
Because of evolution, right?
Yeah. For our ancestors, a small loss of resources could mean death. A small gain was just a nice bonus. So in today's world, losing $100 feels significantly more painful than gaining $100 feels pleasurable.
Which leads directly into the framing effect. There is this experiment with 50 pounds that feels incredibly manipulative when you realize how it works.
Oh, the 50 pounds experiment is a perfect example.
Yeah, so participants are given 50 pounds. Then they are offered a choice framed in 2 ways. Group 1 is told, keep 20 pounds or gamble to keep the whole 50. Group 2 is told, lose 30 pounds or gamble.
And the logic there is completely identical. If you start with 50 pounds and keep 20 pounds, you end up with 20 pounds. If you start with 50 pounds and lose 30 pounds, you also end up with 20 pounds.
The exact same mathematical reality.
Yeah.
But because our brains are terrified of losses, people react entirely differently based solely on which words are used.
Yes, neuroscientists ran this while subjects were in an fMRI machine. The negative emotion evoked by the word lose actually leaks into the final choice. It alters behavior.
That perfectly explains the fourfold pattern of preferences. This concept really turned my understanding of risk upside down. Let's say you have a 95% chance to win $10,000.
Most people become highly risk-averse there. They fear disappointment. Even with overwhelming odds, they'll accept a smaller, certain settlement just to avoid that tiny 5% chance of getting nothing.
Right, but if you flip it and you have a 95% chance to lose $10,000.
People become strangely risk-seeking. They'll reject a settlement and recklessly hope against the odds to avoid the loss altogether.
It's like our brain operates a currency exchange, but the exchange rate for gaining things is totally different than the punishingly high rate for losing things. Avoiding a loss is always our number one priority.
That is a brilliant analogy, and we see this exact same friction play out in indifference maps.
Oh yeah, an indifference map is just charting how we trade off desires, right? Like plotting income versus vacation days on a graph.
Exactly, showing combinations that are equally desirable. But because of loss aversion, we become permanently anchored to wherever we currently are.
So if I have high pay but terrible vacation, losing that salary for more free time feels terrifying. The loss looms larger.
Yes, it creates a status quo bias that keeps people paralyzed in suboptimal situations. And what is truly profound is that the skewed math applies to everything, even how we remember physical pain.
The pain experiments in Daniel Kahneman's book are wild.
They really are. Take patient A and patient B. Patient A undergoes a short, painful procedure. The pain hits a very high peak toward the end and then abruptly stops while it's still severe.
Sounds awful.
Yeah.
Patient B.
Patient B undergoes a much longer procedure. They endure the exact same peaks of intense pain, but it continues for several more minutes, gradually tapering off to a low intensity.
So logically, patient B suffered more total pain.
Objectively, yes. But if you ask them afterward, patient A will report a significantly worse memory of the event. System 1 judges the experience almost entirely by the peak intensity and how it felt at the very end.
The peak end rule. It just ignores the total duration entirely.
And we see similar editing with long-term life satisfaction, like marriage.
Yeah, the marriage data. Life satisfaction spikes precisely at the wedding year, but the graphs show it steadily drifting right back to the baseline over the next 5+ years.
We adapt to everything. The initial excitement just becomes the new baseline.
Which is wild to think about. I mean, for you listening right now, consider how much of your daily life is secretly being puppeted by this System 1 autopilot. From the money you drop in an honesty box when staring eyes are watching you, to what you believe is true just because of a clear font.
It really prefers ease over accuracy.
It totally does. It dictates how you remember pain and love, always prioritizing avoiding losses. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today. If our automatic brains are constantly being silently primed by our environment, by staring eyes, clear fonts, and specific framing of words, who is designing the environments you interact with in today's world? Are you ever truly making your own decisions? Or are you just following the invisible cues left by the architects of your digital and physical spaces?
That is a very unsettling but necessary question to ask ourselves.
If you found this podcast interesting, please like and subscribe.